and welcome to Stress News on the UN, bringing you tomorrow's news today. My name is Kamal Ahmed. This week we'll be bringing you a special report on Exeter Magistrates Court with an expert analysis from a guest panellist. On the panel today we have Matt King and Ned Lamb, legal academics, and Sherilyn Lim, an Exeter University law student. Also in this programme, Russell Chan will explain the representation of powers in the courtroom. During our visit to the court, we witnessed 5 different cases, ranging from standard traffic offences to cases involving theft and harassment. These cases will be discussed later in the context of some of the issues we'll be covering. So, first of all, over to Russell.
Thank you, Kamal. This diagram provides a clear representation of the general layout of the Magistrates' Court. Here's where the magistrates sat. They represent the judiciary. In the court, the central magistrate of the 3 is the spokesperson, and the 3 magistrates make decisions jointly with the majority view prevailing. The clerk of the court is a legally qualified individual who advises the magistrates on the law and controls the proceedings. The magistrates decide the case based on the facts, and the clerk advises them on how to apply the law. Lawyers of the prosecution and defense also attend. The prosecution lawyer represents the Crown. The defense is usually represented by barristers or solicitors hired by the defendant. Defendants may choose to represent themselves, but this did not occur in the case we witnessed, although this is becoming increasingly common due to the cuts in legal aid. If the defendant is represented, then they simply have to confirm their name and details and answer questions, as occurred in every case we observed. However, there was one exception where the defendant was represented but not present. Other powers represented include representatives of probation and welfare services who advise the court. These representatives also advise on sentencing and welfare issues. For example, in one case we witnessed, it was advised that the defendant, a heroin addict, should go to rehab. If the defendant is brought to the court from custody, then the police will be escorting them. This only occurred in one case that we witnessed.
Go. Thank you, Russell. Now over to our guest panellists. So, Matt, could you explain to us the role of the adjudicator?
In the Magistrates' Court, the adjudication is carried out by a panel of 3 magistrates with a legal advisor. The magistrates can act to facilitate court proceedings and can postpone court hearings. They pass sentence after hearing a case presented by the defence and the prosecution and determine the form and extent of the punishment, such as the length of jail time or the amount of compensation awarded. They can also explain legalities to defendants, particularly in cases where the point of law is difficult to understand. Their legal advisor will help them to interpret statutes.
Could you maybe tell us how the parties are represented?
The CPS represents claimants, and the solicitors represent the defendants in court for criminal cases. The respective solicitors for cases that deal with civil wrongs will represent both parties.
Go. So, Ned, what was the relevance of the law to the proceedings you observed?
So, the Magistrates' Court has jurisdiction and the sentencing power for smaller crimes, many of which can be tried as summary offences. So, in summary proceedings, the defendant has no right to a jury trial and no formal indictment is necessary. Both verdict and sentence are solely in the hands of judges and magistrates who have some discretion in these matters. For example, in one case that you, Tim, observed, a defendant who was found to be in possession of cannabis was given a conditional 3-month discharge, and the magistrate decided to forgo charging him, of course, due to his circumstances.
Okay, so how far can a magistrate's court typically go to when passing a sentence?
Well, magistrates have limited sentencing powers of 4 types: discharge, either conditional or absolute, community order, fines, and short custodial sentences. Some offences are classed as either way offences. This can be tried as either summary offences or by jury trial in the Crown Court. And the court will decline the jurisdiction to try the case if it decides the sentencing powers of the magistrate's court are inadequate. In such cases, the case will be adjourned for the prosecution to prepare the case for committal to the Crown Court. So, if the court accepts jurisdiction, the defendant is still entitled to elect to have his or her case tried at the Crown Court.
Okay, so how much of the law you observed was procedure, and how much would you say was influenced by theory?
Well, in summary trials, there is a little use of legal theory. The magistrates have observed clearly, took more of a pragmatic approach towards the case in general, and they relied heavily on guidelines for sentencing and mainly used legal principles in this scope. Justices of the peace have no formal legal training, so obviously the use of legal theory is nearly non-existent. However, some rule of law principles may be relevant to the proceedings.
Okay. So, Sherilyn, as yourself a student, how closely did your experience of the magistrates court resemble the law that you've experienced within your legal studies?
Well, it quite closely resembled the aspect of my study in several areas. It was very helpful to see the law that I studied in theory being put into practice. For example, I've been learning about the hierarchy of the court system. When I observed in the magistrate court, I had the opportunity to see this system in action, where the magistrate choose to refer a criminal case to the Crown Court when their power is not sufficient to the crime committed.
So, how at all does this relate to the theory of rule of law?
I saw some of the principles in practical use during the trial. For example, they use intelligible, clear language and clearly related judgment back to the law. The magistrate also consulted regularly with their legal advisor concerning the law to make sure that the question of legal rights and liability are resolved by the application of law rather than the exercise of discretion. I could see no evidence of bias on the part of the magistrate, and consideration was given on the context of each cases and the situation of the defendant when passing a sentence. However, I did not have the opportunity to see a case where the defendant represented themselves, and so I did not see whether this principle is affected by someone with no legal training attempting to present their own case against a qualified prosecutor.
Brilliant. I would like to say thank you to our panel for your enlightening views on the experience of the magistrates court today. Streatham News interviewed two representatives from Exeter's local welfare service on some of the ethical issues that arose in the courtroom during the visit. I'm here today outside the Amory building to talk to Rose Ashford and Janice Ho about any ethical issues that may have arisen in the case we witnessed. So, Janice, what ethical issues did you observe?
Well, the second case that your team witnessed raised several ethical issues. The defendant was charged with harassment and possession of a small quantity of cannabis. And regarding the charges for cannabis, the fact that the defendant claimed that he was using it to deal with pain and had been for a very long time raised a question of whether his health issues should be taken into consideration when sentencing him. And also the fact that he had been kept in custody also raised a few ethical issues. He had never been in custody before, and the defense claimed that he was finding the experience rather traumatic, and particularly in light of the circumstances in which he was convicted in. He had been threatening his family, whom it was claimed had caused him to lose his business. And in these circumstances, the question was raised as to whether or not it was ethical to keep him in custody, and it was decided correctly, in my opinion, to grant him a conditional discharge. And the fact that he was also now alienated from his family and had no money also meant that it was considered unethical to charge him costs and to make him pay for transport back home.
So, Rose, what ethical issues would you say that you observed?
Well, I would say the fourth case that your team witnessed raised significant ethical issues concerning treatment of vulnerable adults. If you remember, the case concerned a woman in custody who developed fluid psychosis. She couldn't be moved as she claimed to be an android plugged into the wall. The prison had provided help, but she clearly needed to move to psychiatric care, but they could not do so immediately. The application was to extend custody and to delay her trial. The magistrates had to consider whether it was better for her to be in a prison environment than in a community that could not offer appropriate care facilities, and what to do about bringing her to trial, as she was unlikely to recover soon and would not be able to understand the court proceedings. She couldn't even attend the court on that day.
Would you consider their decision to grant the application to extend custody and delay her trial the correct one, in light of the ethical issues we've discussed?
Yes, I would. Had I been asked to give my advice, I would oppose that course of action. Although prison was, if anything, a harmful environment for her to be in, it was at least somewhere where she could prevent from harming herself until she could move to a secure psychiatric facility. The decision to postpone the trial indefinitely was also the correct one in my view, as she was clearly needed treatment and not punishment at that time.
Well, that's it for our latest edition of Streatham News. This is Kamal Ahmed signing off. Stay classy, Exeter.